and welcome to the digital portion of our 10th Congressional Democrat debate. It is streaming live on abc27.com. Of course, you know that if you're watching us. I want to say one thing right off the top. I said a moment ago, I misspoke. I said that the primary election was July 23rd. It is, of course, April 23rd. Sear that in your brain. Circle it in your calendar. April 23rd is the primary election day. I want to thank the candidates for reminding me of that. Okay, we're going to turn to the issue of energy. Pennsylvania is home, of course, to vast natural resources, including natural gas, that creates jobs and revenue, but also creates challenges for the environment. We're going to begin with Ms. Daniels, 60 seconds. How do you plan to balance environmental concerns with the nation's energy needs? You have 60 seconds.
Yeah, here in the 10th, we're already experiencing the consequences of climate change, whether your tomatoes are growing way later in the season or you're experiencing massive floods. We've all had boil water advisories in one segment of the district or another. So we need to take our environment seriously because we can't live outside of this planet. And the goal is to transition, make sure that we're transitioning our workers from unclean sources of energy to cleaner sources of energy, and we don't undermine our workers at the end of the day. So that's really the long-term plan, that we make sure that we are shifting to cleaner sources, but also protecting our workers.
Mr. O'Brien, turning to you, 60 seconds. What is your plan to balance environmental concerns with energy needs?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think we're all on the same page here, especially within the Democratic Party, that we need to move the ball forward when it comes to the energy transition. But I'll say the way that I like to talk about climate is in terms of jobs, because that's the only way we're going to win the independents and moderate Republicans. So the discussions I've had across the district are how to do that. So specifically when talking to the electrical workers, they're all in on things like solar and wind. That really benefits them from a jobs perspective, from a union family sustaining jobs perspective. I'll say the trades, when you look at things like nuclear, so in the future, small modular nuclear reactors, that's something we can put a lot into. That creates jobs. And so does natural gas. And I realize natural gas here, we got to realize that that's going to run out in about 60 to 70 years here in PA as the second leading state and the producer of natural gas. So we are forced to transition. So we got to look towards the future, ultimately applying an all the above approach that protects our energy security and our job security as well.
Thank you. Mr. Copeland, that's a transition to you. You say our goal should be 100% renewable energy. What do you say to those Pennsylvanians whose jobs rely on using natural resources and ratepayers who may have to pay more to turn on the lights? You have 60 seconds.
So the most fundamental thing we got to realize is that as we move toward renewable energy sources, we can do so smartly. Yes, we can provide green jobs for everyone, to include those people that may be displaced. And absolutely, we ought to be looking out for those people, ensuring that they're trained and ready to go on to something else. I want to highlight, again, thank you for raising this issue. I did at the very end of the earlier debate, where it's about climate, it's about our children's future, it's about climate and energy and that balance. So it's about our children, and their children being able to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and have fertile soil in which to grow their crops. That is critically important that we get that right. So I have said, please go to our website, rickcopelandforcongress.com, and you will see all of these things laid out. And we've got a new piece of literature, and I'm saying right now, I encourage all the voters to take a look, research all the candidates, look at what we're putting out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch, you said we need to ensure a healthy planet for future generations. What is your plan to balance current and future energy needs? You have 60 seconds.
Great question, Dennis. It really comes down to applauding the success of the IRA that President Biden was able to pass in a bipartisan fashion. And again, the delivery of the only hydrogen hub here in Pennsylvania. Governor Shapiro was able to get that done with federal support. And I believe that continuing to do the work that helps grow our economy, not just jobs, which are important in union jobs, but also making sure that we're making investments in education, making sure that the next generation, as we talk about, has what they need. Not only do we want to make sure that we live in a safe Pennsylvania, but we want to make sure that our next generation can have clean air, that we're making sure the Chesapeake Bay is protected and not being sued, of course, from Maryland here to Pennsylvania. We want to make sure that affordability is important, and we are going to make sure that we do that together in a bipartisan way.
Ms. Delson, 60 seconds. What is your plan to balance environmental concerns and energy needs if you were in Congress?
Well, I'm going to follow Governor Josh Shapiro's lead on this. It is a two-pronged approach. We have to protect the environment, especially around the fracking sites. We need to have clean air, clean water for the folks who are living there, for all of us. But these are also really important jobs for Pennsylvania. So you have to balance that. You just have to make sure that all the requirements are being followed, that there's nothing illegal going on that's fouling the environment. That's a really important piece of it. And I just want to correct Mr. Lynch. There are 2 hydrogen hubs that we got in Pennsylvania, one in the Philadelphia area and one that's kind of around West Virginia, Western Pennsylvania. And these are the kind of family-sustaining union jobs that we're going to be able to say, my daddy worked there, my granddaddy worked there. These are really important. The fact that we got 2 of these in Pennsylvania is going to be huge for our future. We do this right, we can be leaders in reducing the carbon footprint for our environment, and we can lead the way on cheaper energy for everybody here in the 10th District in Pennsylvania and the country, and we can reduce our dependence on foreign sources of energy.
Mr. Lynch, I'll give you 10 seconds to respond if you'd like to, or no?
I think I'm just a human being and misspoke, but absolutely I'm for supporting all of those who help make that happen, and especially to Governor Shapiro and his team for spearheading that effort.
Mr. Broadhurst, 60 seconds. How do you plan to balance environmental concerns and energy needs?
Well, first I want to, like Blake, commend the Biden administration for beginning the pivot toward fossil fuel economy. This is just the beginning. It's going to take a long time. But I want to highlight just a few quick points. The United States is already energy independent. We're in a very, very fortunate situation to be energy independent. There are very few countries in the world that have that. The second point I want to make is just about every industry in the fossil fuel sector, whether it's oil, natural gas, fracking, but even if you add nuclear power, these are highly subsidized industries, subsidized from the federal government and therefore all of us. And the United States has a very important role to play in determining how we allocate the natural resources that belong to the country, the United States. So the final thing I want to say is it's really almost impossible to accelerate the pivot towards renewables without stepping on a few toes, because we know it's very complex. There are a number of legacy industries that will be affected. Taxes will be affected, agricultural, infrastructure, the insurance industry. So we have to have a holistic approach, but it's not going to be easy.
Okay, according to AAA, Pennsylvania has some of the highest gas prices in the nation. By a show of hands, if you were in Congress, would you support suspending the federal gas tax? Show of hands, who would support suspending the federal gas tax? Everybody does it? Nope. Okay, we're going to move on. Every state surrounding Pennsylvania except West Virginia has legalized recreational marijuana. Raise your hand if you would vote to support a federal law that legalizes adult use cannabis. Unanimous there. No daylight, as you said, between you. Okay, moving on, and Mr. O'Brien, you're going to get this question first. Scott Perry and congressional Republicans say the federal government needs to reduce spending with the national debt, as I mentioned, at $34 trillion and counting. In 60 seconds, how do you plan to work with Republicans to reduce spending or lower the debt?
Yeah, so I'd like to know what they want to reduce funding for. I think we're at the point where we need to make sure that the economy is up on step again, that we've got inflation under control, that our families have jobs that will sustain them throughout. And so when I talked about that earlier, where I'm a staunch supporter of America's workers and America's unions. I think that's the start of this right here, of how we have to turn around the economics. And so I'm happy to say that I have been endorsed by the largest union in PA10, the Teamsters, in addition to the iron workers, in addition to the rail workers' Smart Transportation Division. So staunch supporter of America's workers and America's middle class, because unions are the backbone of the middle class. The middle class is the backbone of democracy. And again, I'll push for strong anti-monopoly legislation and tax code adjustments. And I talked about the bottom side before. The top side, I think we need to increase the estate tax. I think a value-added tax on luxury goods, and taking a look at some of those capping the mortgage interest deduction that we got out there.
Mr. Copeland, I think it was almost a two-part question. We've got the debt, but also how are you working in a bipartisan fashion? Would you to get the nation's arms around that? 60 seconds.
Thank you very much. Number one, I would work on in a bipartisan fashion for every single thing we do in Congress. And oh, by the way, I've been doing that for 9 years on the Carlisle School Board. So I know how to work with people, how to get things done, how to think about, hey, let's surround ourselves, focusing on common ground about things that are important for the American people. I'm going to disagree with the premise of this question. I'm not going to agree that we need to cut spending across the board. I think, in fact, the most important thing we need to do is to ensure that we collect the taxes on the wealthiest Americans and the corporations. And if we did that, if we enforced that, there would be multiple more millions of dollars. And we wouldn't have a budget debt, and we wouldn't have a deficit. Because I'm a firm believer in spending money effectively to do things like building better infrastructure, like funding public education, like doing all those things where we put $1 in and it pays us back $5 or $6.
Mr. Lynch, 60 seconds. How do you plan to work with Republicans to reduce spending or lower the debt?
I think it's important that we show bipartisanship. I've done that my entire career for the last 20 years in various positions, all here in central Pennsylvania throughout the Congressional 10th. And in doing so, kitchen table issues are important. We need to understand that as we have a budget, we need to make sure we have money to pay for it. So it's reshuffling some of the things that we're spending, of course, and absolutely closing corporate loopholes. How important that is, that the wealthy can get away with so many and so much, and that nonprofit organizations or essential government entities are not fully funded. That is important. We have over 10,000 pages in our tax document. That should be cleaned up a little bit. And no, I'm not referring to even a flat tax. I'm supporting legislation to make sure that we work towards each other to essentially uplift and support our families.
Ms. Stelson, 60 seconds. How do you plan to work with Republicans, or do you, to reduce spending and lower the debt? Do you acknowledge that that debt is a problem?
Yes, I will work with anybody who wants to reach across the aisle and actually take care of the things that affect us here in the 10th District. I will say that first. Amen to much of what Rick Copeland said about this. And let's start with Scott Perry, who is so extreme. He is the only member of the Pennsylvania delegation, which has a lot of extreme voices. He's the only member that voted to shut down the government. Congress has the power of the purse. The House does. He's the only one who voted to shut down the government 4 times in a row. This is a guy who's not serious about working with anyone. In this 118th Congress, we have only accomplished 27 pieces of legislation at last count, and 3 of those were to keep the government open. So he's an obstructionist. He's not working with anybody on anything. He's had 12 years to solve some of our problems, and I would challenge anybody to tell me exactly what he's done.
Mr. Broadhurst, 60 seconds. How do you plan to work with Republicans, if you do, to reduce spending or lower the debt?
Well, first of all, Dennis, I want to kind of question the premise of the question,
okay,
because we don't have a massive debt problem. The American
You don't buy the $34 trillion?
No, I don't, because when you look at the size of the American economy, it's not a major issue. It's only an issue when Democrats are in power. When Democrats are in the White House or have the majority in Congress, then all of a sudden it becomes a massive issue. The reality is we have to look at what has happened over the past 20 years. It's natural that the debt would increase because we had multiple bailouts. In 2008, 2009, the Great Recession, and then just a few years later with the COVID lockdown, where the American government put the entire country on its back through deficit spending. So we can't be surprised that the debt has increased. But relative to the size of the economy, it's not a major problem. But what is a problem is that we have been transitioning away from a progressive tax structure. And I think everyone here, I hope everyone here agrees with me on this point. A progressive tax structure, for those who are watching, means that the more you make, the more you pay. This was one of the foundational principles of the post-war era. And this was one of the reasons why America, from a public policy standpoint, was the envy of the world. Progressive taxes. We have to get back to that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Ms. Daniels. How do you plan to work with Republicans to reduce spending or lower the debt? 60 seconds.
Well, I think we still have some reasonable Republicans in Congress that we could work with. And we know that part of the reason we have the debt that we do is that our credit rating keeps going down every time there's a government shutdown, every time we can't seat our Congress, et cetera. So if we eliminate the far right from our congressional level, that's a beginning point. I am the only person here who talks and has dealt with budgets. I do not believe in spending irresponsibly. We are accountable to our taxpayers. I'm the only person who's voted against tax increases when they were not necessary, but I've never also shorthanded our workers. I've never shorthanded our residents or taxpayers. So I hope folks will look at my record, because we do need to be thoughtful and considerate about how we fund our programs to make sure that we are making sure that the quality of life of our residents improves.
Well, I once again want to thank all of these outstanding candidates, 6 Democrats seeking your vote. I do want to point out that on March 12th, which is next Tuesday, we will have the 5 Democratic candidates for Attorney General. That's a statewide debate. And on March 14th, which is next Thursday, we will have the 2 Republican candidates for Attorney General. And I do want to encourage you to go to vote, and my producer Rachel Cherry just reminded me, it is April 23rd, the primary election, April 23rd. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great night, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.